My name is Dermot Brady. I am a senior lecturer in social work at Kingston University, and I have responsibility for what is called on-the-job learning. And so I'm going to explain to you a little bit about how that works. Some of the basic principles here will maintain throughout your program. This is specifically for the postgraduate diploma in social work program. The intended audience is both the apprentices, some of our own staff, and of course the mentors. So what's the idea here today? General overview of the program, not in too much detail. You'll be getting a lot of information about various modules and activities as you go on, so I'm going to try not to overload you with that. My focus will be more on the job learning. I'll explain what that is and who's involved. There are some things you can do right now, and we will start to make some progress in your first term. A little bit about professional standards, because they will govern most of the activity that you do. And again, only a very, very brief overview. There's a separate recording, as it were, about all of that. We'll think about the contrasting learning experience. This particular video is about your first term. So that'll be roughly September, October to December. But we're actually looking a little bit ahead to December and January, when your contrasting learning experience will begin. And we can actually make a start on some activities in relation to that. And we can actually start to think about our working relationships with various different people involved in supporting you on the program. In class, I shared this little diagram. You become increasingly used to it, but it just maps out the modules. Learning is kind of bunched in modules, as it were, over the whole course. There are 5 modules in the first year and 3 in the second, and in total 3 of these are concerned with on-the-job learning. Some of these classes are taught independently, just for the postgraduate dips. Some are taught with the BA program, much larger classes, and some are taught in a mixture, really. There's some kind of recall days where you'll meet with your colleagues from the BA program, but of course your on-the-job learning will be specific to you and in the workplace. So our general ethos of the program is this kind of experiential or constructivist learning, where we treat you as adult learners and think that problem solving and problem-based learning is more important in some respects than content. Now, content is not unimportant. Theory, knowledge, etc., of course, are coming into it, but we expect quite an active engagement in the classroom, where you bring your actual work and reflections from the workplace into the class, and then you go out into the workplace with kind of new learning, theory, things you've talked to the perhaps teaching staff and your peers about, and you do some experimentation, even try out new things in the workplace, and you bring that back in. So we have a kind of what we would like to think of as a virtuous loop. Now, there is, as you can imagine with everything in social work, there is lots of different guidance. What is on the job? What is off the job? What do all these things mean? And you will get detailed guidance about everything. There's an on-the-job learning handbook, for example. And of course, you can ask us, because I don't know about you, but I need confirmation about things from people sometimes. So we have a kind of an open door attitude to learners asking us questions. In the simplest way possible, all apprentices, not just the social work apprenticeship program, are split in a kind of an 80-20 split. It's so essentially 4 days in the workplace, 1 day in teaching and learning and independent study. And you can work out kind of, there is some nuance and some kind of things you can, where does this fit? Not really too difficult, but that 1 day in the workplace, either in class or in self-directed learning, because you will need some time and space for assignment preparation, perhaps, things of that nature, that it maintains for the whole year. So sometimes people think you come into university, oh, we'll stop in April and then we'll have 3 months off. No, I'm afraid it does not work like that. You're apprentice 24/7 the whole year. So that 1 day a week for the whole of your course is to be protected. The key relationships, well, obviously the apprenticeship, the apprentice is at the top, and direct work, learning, developing, reading, professional development, all those kind of things, reflective supervision and support. And they will be supported by the mentor and or line manager. Now, because the program involves a lot of different employers, 30 odd thereabouts, there are a lot of different ways of doing things. And some people have capacity to do things in some ways or a preference to do them in other ways and so on and so forth. Mainly mentors are going to be experienced people in your team, but on occasion, the line manager will take on that role. It doesn't really matter so much, but the two, if they're they'll have to work in cohort, in concert with each other to support your learning in any event, because obviously there's going to be things about caseload and casework that need to be considered. So your mentor is going to be a key person and hopefully will stay with you over the whole of the course. And that isn't always possible, but it's certainly desirable. People with experience contribute to Kingston, to the course, the evaluation, the design, the delivery, so on and so forth. And of course, they will contribute to your work. They will give you feedback in the workplace, and there are ways that we ask you to seek that feedback and so on. And then there is a sub-regional assessor who is the Kingston University staff member responsible for your overall assessment of on-the-job learning. And we'll come back to that person in a little bit more detail later on. So the mentor and the line manager, where did this idea of mentoring come from? Well, it comes from Greek. Ulysses goes and travels around the world, or at least he thinks it's around the world. It's mainly around the Mediterranean, but there you go. He has a family and a son, Telemachus, and he leaves Telemachus in the charge of mentor. Yes, that's where the name came from, the guy's name. And he was a pretty terrible mentor. He wasn't very good at it. So the first mentor was rubbish and needed the help of Athena, who is pictured here on the top right, the goddess of war and wisdom, to sort them out, basically, really. So the first mentor wasn't very good. But of course, that's mentoring in a very kind of Eurocentric sort of a way of thinking about it. We talk about reflection and stuff like that, like it was just kind of invented in Europe and isn't a kind of constant human thing all over the world, which of course it is. So I have included the Sankofa figure here. Comes from West Africa, and it's this idea, the reflective notion that there is no shame in returning to the past to pick up things and move them on into the future. Probably fairly poor description of what's quite complex idea, but really the point here is that mentoring is universal. And we have to be a little bit wary in social work practice that we don't get just too Eurocentric about everything. Other perspectives are available. So what do mentors do? I think, again, it's a pretty universal thing. It arises as one person communicates interest and care for the well-being and development of another. So you need somebody on your side who understands about training as a social worker, who's probably more knowledgeable and experienced than you, and perhaps can help you through some of the difficulties that inevitably arise when one is taking on a course of learning. So that person is going to provide supervision, feedback, and perhaps help you to identify learning opportunities, and really, in brief, to kind of help you talk things through. Now, you will go on your contrasting learning experience in December or January, and as I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here because you will get a lot of information about it, but it means you will move out of your main team into a team that contrasts with the kind of work that you're currently doing. Now, you may stay with your same mentor, and quite often that's what people do, or you may have a new mentor in the CLE setting, or you may have an on-site supervisor who will kind of undertake the day-to-day role of support. Now, there are lots of different arrangements, like I said earlier, and you will get more information about that. So not something to be concerned about right now, but just a kind of a brief overview of how it's likely to work out. you know, there's lots of negotiation usually prior to the start of the CLE, and we'll get to that in due course. Who was the SRA? Now, the SRA, that it means sub-regional assessor. There's a story to that, don't even ask. But in any event, this person is an experienced social worker. They're all practice educators and they're lecturers, quite often senior lecturers at Kingston University. So I, for example, am one of the SRAs. They are responsible, as I said earlier, for your overall assessment of your on-the-job learning, and they act as university tutor and KU support. So that person should be helping you with your academic work, perhaps, signposting towards student support if it's required, really act as the university's representative, but as your supporter, your first line of call in the university. And as I say, they are also responsible for assessing your on-the-job learning. And you'll see more about that as the course progresses. There are things that we can do right now, however, and so the first thing is to connect, to make that connection between the apprentice, the mentor, and the SRA. At the start of your course, of course, we ask for details of your mentor, and employers are required to provide a mentor in a timely manner to support your learning in the workplace. So at the moment, it's likely we're putting all of that information together and starting those initial meetings. That starting to getting to know each other process is really quite critical. There will be a tripartite meeting. Tripartites are done on the system called AppTem, and that's a monitoring and compliance program that all apprentices in Kingston University and indeed a great many other universities have to kind of go along with. And again, you get more details about that. It's not actually all that complicated, but adding information about that in here, along with everything else, just a little bit too much, I think. But in any event, there will be a separate little recording about that. Starting planning for the CLE, well, that's definitely something we can do. And that links to 5 here, making progress with the CLE agreement. So in this little kind of presentation, I'm just going to talk about how you would start doing the CLE agreement, because it also has the effect of starting that learning relationship on a solid basis. Before we go to that bit, there are some professional standards. Surprise, surprise. It is social work after all. I counted 14 standards the last time I had a look at all the social work standards. But this is going to be the core standard for you, and you will see it in AppTem and the tripart reviews, etc., etc. And of course, you won't know anything about it at the moment because it's all totally new to you. They come from Skills England, and there are quite a few knowledge, skills, and behaviors that must be mapped out over the course, and we'll show you how to do that. It's not really all that difficult, but it will take a little while of getting used to. They're not the only standards. We have Social Work England, determine what kind of teaching and learning we have to do in the course. And as you can imagine, these are really quite detailed. And there are also the Social Work England professional standards. Social Work England do not register social workers, unlike some previous regulators, but they do expect you to understand and know about the professional standards by the time you come to the end of your course. So you won't be doing anything much about them in your first year, but there will be more input about them in the second. We also use the Professional Capabilities Framework. This is BASWA, British Association of Social Work Standards, been around for a little while, a little bit of a checkered history. One of the reasons we use this is we find it quite user-friendly, designed by the profession, for the profession, and critically, it has levels of progression. The other standards are just standard, you know, just like that. But the PCF actually has standards for different levels, including entry to the course and first year readiness for practice and the final placement, so on and so forth. So it develops over time, and you probably come across that, but you will get to know it really quite well. For 4016 and that first module from September to October, we're working to the readiness for practice level. See what that means in a bit more detail in due course. But what about skills acquisition, learning? How is this done? Are you a novice or expert, etc.? Well, chances are that you've acquired expertise in some areas of practice because you've been involved in working in organizations for quite some time. You probably know the legal context. You may have a lot of contact with actual people using the services and so on. And for other things, it will be, I've never done that. I've never had the experience. I know that people do it, but I have no clue. Turns out really that learning and development is not a linear process. We kind of go forward, we go back, we pick up things that we didn't know before, a little bit like Sankofa, eh? There was a seed that we left. We didn't understand its importance. Later on, we kind of go, aha. So it's more like a spiral. There are many spirals in social work. It's the thing about social work models. They're very helpful for ordering our thinking, but they don't map exactly onto the real world. So they're helpful and useful, but they have limitations. This is Prochaska and Di Clemente's trans-theoretical model of change. Actually came from smoking cessation initially, but it's used widely in other things. So learning is a process of change, and we may be kind of pre-contemplation. There's some things we don't know. But I guess most of us really are in the contemplation bit. We're kind of puzzling. It's a very common experience, for example, for apprentices to come into class. Then a lecturer, say, for example, Jacqueline might describe a model, and apprentices are sitting there. Oh, that's what that's called? I do that anyway. Do you know what I mean? So then we prepare, and we're a bit more, I suppose we have more intent in our learning, and then we're starting to take action. Maintain that over time, and occasionally we have bad days. We have relapses. We don't really feel like doing it. That's just normal. But in the initial stages, we might feel a little bit overwhelmed. In the first 2 weeks, of course, there's a lot of information. Well, we don't expect you to take it all in. Learning development is a process, not an event, and it's not a case of learning things off by rote. So it would be not entirely unusual that a person's mood might drop and they might feel a little bit overfaced in the early circumstances. By making small gains, little bits of progress, our mood lifts, our performance improves. This actually comes from initially Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model about death and dying and stages of grief. She did say in her own book that people don't uniformly go through stages of grief, that we all have our own kind of unique and personal journey. And of course, there are other models about that available. Now, there's 2 slides here, which are essentially what we call module at a glance, and they tell you the kind of things that we'll be doing in class at the early stages of your course. I am certainly not going to go through that in any detail. You can read it for yourself. It'll be available on Canvas. And as activities come up, you will get a little bit of briefing about expectations about those things. One of them will be about your, so the next page, I believe, assessed and practice interviews. You can see they're happening much later in the year. Oh, in actual fact, rather foolishly, this is from 4014, the BA module, but in any effect, that's a mistake on my part. I'll move on to the next slide and pretend that never happened. But your assessed and practice interviews are actually going to happen in November, and you will get more details about those in October. Apologies for my stupidity. It won't be the first time, nor the last, that such a thing will occur. So what is the mentoring agreement? So you're contracting in your contrasting learning experience about what you're going to do and what you're going to learn. So there is a template for this. We're not going to release that template just yet because I think you need to understand about CLE a little bit more before we actually get to that. But there are things you can do. Essentially, it is up to you to make it real. So it needs to be an active document rather than a tick box exercise. So there's some initial conversations that you should be doing, and we have some suggestions about how you might do that. But there are other ways available. Again, I'd just like to stress this notion that there's stages in the mentoring process, and this applies equally to the mentor and the apprentice. It takes place over time. Initially, we're setting the baselines, contracting, deciding how we're going to work with each other and getting to know each other. Then we maintain the focus over time. And as the course progresses, we anticipate and expect, and this is usually what happens, that the apprentice becomes more of a self-directive learner, and the mentor increasingly is a kind of a supportive, but kind of receding a little bit into the background rather than kind of guiding and pushing a person forward, perhaps. But in any event, a process, not an event. So the contract, it won't look quite like this, but it'll be something like this. And you'll put in your personal details and all those kind of things. I mean, it's just normal bureaucratic process. I'm not going to ask you to start that yet. I mean, it'll only take a few minutes. But then there is a section about roles and responsibilities. So you will get quite detailed information about what does the apprentice, the mentor, the SRA, the line manager, so on and so forth, what is expected of them on the CLE. This is the bit, however, that I think you can make a start on straight away. So meet with the mentor, meet with your apprentice, meet with the SRA. Let's all meet together and talk and start getting this thing going. And the first bit is getting to know and understand each other. If social work is relational, as I said earlier, social work education is also relational. So we ask you to describe any tools you use for this conversation. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of the kind of things you could use, but you may have your own choice about that to make, and that's fine too. Then, really, the meat of this is in a sneeze is about to go. And I am not recording the whole thing again just for a sneeze, but anyway, a little moment of light entertainment. Then you will describe what you learned about each other and how you can use this in a positive way in the relationship. So it's a kind of a little process here. And that's what we ask you to do, first of all. Now, one of the first models that we kind of suggest might be useful is social graces model. This comes from Burnham et al. And it's social graces model. It's from Family Therapy. The article is available. It's open access, so mentors and apprentices can access that for free. And it's thinking about the learning relationships and the elements of power, identity, similarities and differences that might be involved in that. So this kind of tool gives us a way to start those conversations rather than sitting across from the table and going, who are you? And we can talk through assumptions we might make about each other, what elements of power are at work. How did you feel about having that conversation? Was it a kind of liberating, kind of interesting, amusing, enjoyable conversation? Were there moments where you felt it was a little bit difficult? What was voiced, unvoiced, visible, so on and so forth? Because we're not one thing, are we? Some of us is visible in the workplace, some of it is not. We are able to talk about some things and not about others. And it's kind of interesting, the contracts, the decisions we make about those things, whether we feel safe to discuss some stuff and maybe not so safe to discuss other things. And of course, some things is private and it's not suitable at all in any way, shape or form for a learning conversation in work. But this conversation will almost certainly involve some personal elements because we bring ourselves to work after all. We may kind of hide or unvoice some elements of ourselves, but nonetheless, there we are. All our glory. Now, there are other models. Social graces seems to be very popular. I've seen people use it very well. But not all models might be, I don't know, you might not just like it, pure and simple. And people have developed different models. So Prosper Teedham here, a well-known social work researcher, academic, noticed some years ago that Black African students were a significant cohort entering the profession. I think you just look around your class, see your peers. It doesn't take a genius to work out that that's absolutely true. So the relationship building tools are equally important for everybody, but there was very little, particularly at the time she was writing, because she's developed a body of literature around this, about the needs of African students in relation to practice education or their experience. So she went about creating that evidence and that research. Black African students were more likely to fail placements and experience a range of things like homesickness, pretty horrible feeling that, nipped wings, meaning that they had achieved well in other educational contexts, but for some reason in practice education, this was not happening. Lack of practice experience, perhaps less an issue for apprentices who have plenty of practice experience, and financial constraints, the life of being a student. Again, when you stop and think, then you kind of go, okay, so this particular group of students are not having the same experience or the same outcomes or achievements. And you kind of think, is this because of the students or because of the things the practice educator system, as it were, does? And I'm hoping that it wouldn't be too great a jump to understand that there's something about the practice education system here, because there's nothing wrong with the cohort, is there? You see what I mean? Of particular significance, she notes, is the view that student persistence, that practice learning felt like another world. What the hey is this? So she developed something, the Mandela model, to address this. And I always think that, having used this model on occasion, one of the most important bits of it is to make time, to allow for the conversation, to enable that conversation to happen. It's like a lot of our kind of relationships in social work, isn't it? If you don't kind of get to know the person that you're working with and understand their world and are open to listening to their perspective, you're going to miss things, right? And if you miss things, you're going to have to go back and do it all again anyway. So that investment in time is really, really important. It's more effective apart from anything else. You're supposed to be working in an anti-oppressive way, after all, are we not? You can see the model, how it works. And as I say, Prosper has written about what this actually works in practice. So she's built up research over time. There are other models, like we'll probably do something about the share model, reflective models, etc., etc. But we always have to think about what are we missing. We have some responsibility to come up with new models, new ways of working that are suitable or fit for the students or the learners that we're working with. And maybe the apprenticeship might be an opportunity to develop those new ideas and ways of working. Why not? If not you, who? So the agreement moves on, then there's several different elements to it. If you do that first bit well enough, I think you've really actually achieved something really quite important. But you can actually extend it a little bit and think about the apprentices' strengths. What kind of social work knowledge, skills, behavior they already possess. You're not coming to this as absolute beginners or novices, after all, are you? Some of you have been working in services for quite a long time and might have learned a thing or two. So when you're thinking about these knowledge, skills, and behaviors, you can think about professional things, about your understanding of the law. Some of that you would just take for granted. You might think, oh, well, everybody knows about the Children Act 1989 or the Care Act 2014, but no, they do not. So you have knowledge that you probably just take for granted, but actually not everybody will have that. And of course, there are some personal and professional attributes and skills that might be important here too. So don't be too modest about this. You're making a professional assessment of your own skills and knowledge. It's not blowing your own trumpet or anything of that nature. Indeed, terribly wrong with that anyway. But try to be comprehensive in this. It gives you a platform, perhaps, to build on, and may be helpful in thinking about how you might develop your learning opportunities and what kind of things you need to work on. More on that later, not really for this presentation. So in any learning context, constructivist learning or scaffolding learning, what we're talking about here, if you're in your comfort zone, there's not really much happening. You might be sitting on the couch, filing your nails, having a cup of tea. It's all very comfortable, but nothing is really happening in terms of cognitive or professional development. So we need to push the envelope out into the learning zone, where it is occasionally a little bit uncomfortable. Learning can be, but it can be also a joyous space. What is not a joyous space is the panic zone, when we overload people with too much information, too much going on in the workplace, too many cases, etc., etc. We don't learn in them circumstances. So we have to think about, how do we avoid getting into that panic zone? You might benefit from hearing from other learners, your peers. This is an article, It's My Time Now, which we will make available to everybody. But as you can see from that little open padlock there, it's an open access article, so mentors can also read this. There isn't a huge amount written about apprentices at the moment in social work, but it's a growing body of literature, and this is one of the more solid things that has been written, and it's actually quite interesting, and I think that you might find common cause with some of your colleagues up there in UCLan. So really putting it together, we have the employer, the Kingston University, then we have all these people bridging the gaps, the various learning modules. It's quite a complex little planetary system, but it all seems to kind of rotate and orbit in a quite effective way. The kind of next things we'll be doing are short ones about AppTem and tripartite, so you know what to expect and what to do with those. More details about the contrasting learning experience, completing that agreement. Things like the index of evidence, direct observations, lots and lots more information to come. That's quite enough for one day, however. But please feel free to ask. That's what we're there for. Our job at the university lecturers is to help people succeed in their education. That's what we're there for, and hopefully that's what we can do. A couple of little references there at the end, and really I think that's quite enough at about 30 odd minutes. Not too bad, but I think that's quite sufficient for one day. So now I'm going to stop the recording, and hopefully I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.